Hello, friends. It's a pleasure to be with you once again here in this course that's considering reading the writings of Shoghi Effendi. We started with some general overviews so far in the lessons we've had, and now we've been centering on passages about the greatness of this day, about the greatness of the revelation, as found in the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, a message composed by Shoghi Effendi back in 1934. We finished reading the quotations that Shoghi Effendi, out of the whole ocean of the revelation, has selected to drive home the point he's making about the nature and scope of Baha'u'llah's revelation as compared with those of the past and looking into the future. We also have reviewed some parts of the foreword to God Passes By, which bear on this same subject. I want to go back to the dispensation, the introductory material that we looked at before we began reading these quotes, to just review, so to speak, the overview that Shoghi Effendi gives us of what he's going to quote and why. The faith of Baha'u'llah should indeed be regarded, he writes, if we wish to be faithful to the tremendous implications of its messages, as the culmination of a cycle, the final stage in a series of preliminary and progressive revelations. These, beginning with Adam and ending with the Bab, have paved the way and anticipated, with an ever-increasing emphasis, the advent of that day of days in which he who is the promise of all ages should be made manifest. Well, it becomes clear, friends, this is the culmination of the whole Adamic cycle. This is the fruit of the tree that has been growing since, some 6,000 years. Now, Shoghi Effendi goes on to say, to this truth, which we've just talked about, which is that this is with ever-increasing emphasis, the advent of that day of days in which he who is the promise of all ages should be made manifest. To this truth, he writes, the utterances of Baha'u'llah abundantly testify, as we have seen in our studies the past 2 weeks. A mere reference to the claims which in vehement language and with compelling power he himself has repeatedly advanced cannot but fully demonstrate the character of the revelation of which he was the chosen bearer. To the words that have streamed from his pen, the fountainhead of so impetuous a revelation, we should therefore direct our attention if we wish to obtain a clear understanding of its importance and meaning. And then he reviews the various categories that he is addressing here, and in which he has placed, so to speak, these various quotations, some 40 of them, more than that. When he begins to review this subject, he makes mention, he says that in the communication addressed to the American believers, I have, in the course of my explanation of the station of the Bab, made a passing reference to the incomparable greatness of the revelation of which he considered himself to be the humble precursor. Just at the end of this section of the readings of selections from the writings of Baha'u'llah about this subject, Shoghi Effendi mentions to the affirmations of the Bab, each of which reinforces the strength and confirms the truth of these remarkable statements I've already referred. So he's looking back to the beginning of the presentation that he made. And I want to now return back to that. I skipped over it so that we could have the look at Baha'u'llah's words and writings as selected by Shoghi Effendi about the subject first. Now we're going to look back at these quotations from the Bab. Let me get those available for you here. Oops. No, here. There. Most disabled attendee screen sharing. Host disabled attendee screen sharing. Okay, somebody who's in charge of that, see if they can fix that. Okay. Now we want to bring this up.
Double click.
I hope you can see these quotations now. The second paragraph, he whom Baha'u'llah has acclaimed in the Kitab-i-Gan as that promised Qayyim who has manifested no less than 25 out of the 27 letters which all the prophets were destined to reveal. So great a revealer has himself testified to the preeminence of that superior revelation that was soon to supersede his own. The germ, the Bab asserts in the Persian Bayan, that holds within itself the potentialities of the revelation that is to come, is endowed with a potency superior to the combined forces of all those who follow me. Powerful statement. And he goes on, then he's selected several passages from the Bab, the Guardian has selected. Of all the tributes, he again affirms, I have paid to him who is to come after me. The greatest is this, my written confession that no words of mine can adequately describe him, nor can any reference to him in my book, the Bayan, do justice to his cause. And again, the Bayan, he in that same book categorically declares, and whoever is therein revolve round the saying of him whom God shall make manifest, even as the Aleph, that is the gospel, and whosoever was therein revolved round the saying of Muhammad, the apostle of God. 1,000 perusals of the Bayan, he further remarks, cannot equal the perusal of a single verse to be revealed by him whom God shall make manifest, which is the reference of the Bab to the station and being of Baha'u'llah. Today, the Bayan is in a stage of seed at the beginning of the manifestation of him whom God shall make manifest. Its ultimate perfection will become apparent. The Bayan and such as are believers therein yearn more ardently after him than the yearning of any lover after his beloved. The Bayan deriveth all its glory from him whom God shall make manifest. All blessing be upon him who believeth in him, and woe betide him that rejecteth his truth. After these quotations, Shoghi Effendi selected another passage where the Bab has addressed Sayyid Yahya Darabi, better known to us as Vahid, who was the most learned, the most eloquent, and influential among his followers, and enjoyed a very high national prestige in the Persia of that time. The Bab utters this warning to him. by the righteousness of him whose power causeth the seed to germinate, and who breatheth the spirit of life into all things. Were I to be assured that in the day of his manifestation thou wilt deny him, I would unhesitatingly disown thee and repudiate thy faith. If, on the other hand, I be told that a Christian who beareth no allegiance to my faith will believe in him, the same will I regard as the apple of mine eye. Think of that, goodness. Then Shoghi Effendi chooses a line from one of the Bab's prayers in which he's communing with Baha'u'llah. Exalted art thou, O my Lord, the Omnipotent. How puny and contemptible my word and all that pertaineth unto me appear, unless they be related to thy great glory. Grant that through the assistance of thy grace, whatsoever pertaineth unto me may be acceptable in thy sight. Friends, in the light of this, you'll want to look at the passages in God Passes By that describe the stage at which there was a deviation in the cause, and Mirza Yahya made a counter declaration just after Baha'u'llah made his. And a portion of the Babis followed him. So you can imagine how this previous quotations here apply to him. If thou wilt deny him, I would unhesitatingly disown thee and repudiate thy faith. And of course, this happened. But Baha'u'llah wrote many tablets and explanations and proofs about his own position. And some of those saved some of these friends who were disillusioned in some way or misinformed. And Baha'u'llah sent teachers into Iran to clarify his position, the declaration of his mission to the Babis. In the Qayyum al-Asma, the Bab's commentary on the Surah of Joseph's, characterized by the author of the Ugan as the first, the greatest and mightiest of the books revealed by the Bab, we read the following references to Baha'u'llah. Out of utter nothingness, O great and omnipotent Master, thou hast, through the celestial potency of thy might, brought me forth and raised me up to proclaim this revelation. I've made none other but thee my trust. I have clung to no will but thy will. O thou remnant of God, I've sacrificed myself wholly for thee. I've accepted curses for thy sake, and have yearned for naught but martyrdom in the path of thy love. Sufficient witness unto me is God, the exalted, the protector, the ancient of days. And then finally, this last quotation selected by Shoghi Effendi to reinforce this argument here. And when the appointed hour hath struck, he again addresses Baha'u'llah in that same commentary. Do thou, by the leave of God, the All-Wise, reveal from the heights of the most lofty and mystic mount a faint and infinitesimal glimmer of thy impenetrable mystery, that they who have recognized the radiance of the Sinaic splendor may faint away and die as they catch a lightning glimpse of the fierce and crimson light that envelops thy revelation. Baha'u'llah, in the passage that's quoted in the Gleanings, also refers to this, himself being this impenetrable mystery, and refers to the radiance of the Snaic splendor that is radiated through him. All right, now, friends, we're moving on. Let me see, we want to bring up these quotations. We're going to bring up some quotations now of the Master. How do we bring it up on the screen here? I don't have it quite on yet. It's up now, okay. Now we return back to the section of the dispensation that we've been studying. Such is, dearly beloved friends, Baha'u'llah's own written testimony to the nature of his revelation. Now, this is the whole point of this long section of the dispensation, is to hear in those passages selected by Shoghi Effendi, Baha'u'llah declaring the nature of his own teachings, the nature of the revelation with which he's been entrusted. Then he says to the affirmations of the Bab, each of which reinforces the strength and confirms the truth of these remarkable statements. I've already referred, those are the ones we just read. What remains for me to consider in this connection are such passages in the writings of Abdul Baha, the appointed interpreter of these same utterances, as throw further light upon and amplify various features of this enthralling theme. Now we hear from the Master. The tone of his language is indeed emphatic, and his tribute no less glowing than that of either Baha'u'llah or the Bab. We have a series of quotations that gathered by Shoghi Effendi and translated for this purpose. Centuries, nay, ages must pass away, he affirms in one of his earliest tablets, ere the day star of truth shineth again in its midsummer splendor, or appeareth once more in the radiance of its vernal glory. These words then he's addressing to all of us. How thankful must we be for having been made in this day the recipients of so overwhelming a favor. Would that we had 10,000 lives that we might lay them down in thanksgiving for so rare a privilege, so high an attainment, so priceless a bounty. I've seen another tablet of the Master. He says that in recognition of the bounty of having recognized Baha'u'llah, is accepted by Baha'u'llah and recognized this revelation. He said if we prostrated ourselves 1,000 times, it would be insufficient gratitude and thanks to the Blessed Beauty for this. How very fortunate we were to be born in this age and to have come to knowledge of his revelation, and through the bounty of his own blessings, able to recognize it. The mere contemplation, he adds, of the dispensation inaugurated by the Blessed Beauty would have sufficed to overwhelm the saints of bygone ages. Saints, he tells us, who longed to partake for one moment of its great glory. Continuing this theme, he says, the holy ones of past ages and centuries have each and all yearned with tearful eyes to live, though for one moment, in the day of God. Their longings unsatisfied, they repaired to the great beyond, How great, therefore, is the bounty of the Abba Beauty, who, notwithstanding our utter unworthiness, hath through his grace and mercy breathed into us in this divinely illumined century the spirit of life, hath gathered us beneath the standard of the beloved of the world, and chosen to confer upon us a bounty for which the mighty ones of bygone ages had craved in vain. The day of God, although we have other passages that say in general the day of God is every day when a manifestation of God appears. But this has a particular character. This particular day of God, the Baha'u'llah has been raised up by the Supreme Creator to issue a revelation uh, which inaugurates a universal cycle, which includes the Adamic cycle before it, but is projected for 500,000 years into the future, and during which the prophets of God, the various messengers of God who will appear in successive dispensations, will be operating under the shadow of Baha'u'llah, the day of God himself. The souls of the well-favored among the concourse on high, he likewise affirms, the sacred dwellers of the most exalted paradise, are in this day filled with burning desire to return unto this world, that they may render such service as lieth in their power to the threshold of the Abha beauty. The effulgence of God's splendorous mercy, he in a passage alluding to the growth and development of the faith declares, hath enveloped the peoples and kindreds of the earth, and the whole world is bathed in its shining glory. The day will soon come when the light of divine unity will have so permeated the east and the west that no man dare any longer ignore it. And once more, now in the world of being, the hand of divine power hath firmly laid the foundations of this all highest bounty and this wondrous gift. Whatsoever is latent in the innermost of this holy cycle shall gradually appear and be made manifest. For now is but the beginning of its growth and the dayspring of the revelation of its signs. Ere the close of this century and of this age, it shall be made clear and evident how wondrous was that springtime and how heavenly was that gift. Ere the close of this century, so we're talking about the first Baha'i century perhaps, in any case from 1844 to 1944 is all of the events and developments of that, and an insight into a further insight into the greatness of the day we live and how it stands in relationship to past ages and centuries, is collected and expressed by Shoghi Effendi and God Passes By. This is such an essential text. We want to be going to it, rereading chapters of it throughout the year so that we absorb the spirit of Baha'i history and use that as an impulse to oft return to the collected writings that Shoghi Effendi has offered us of Baha'u'llah's teachings. Now an extraordinary statement is introduced by the master here. He says, in confirmation of the exalted rank of the true believer referred to by Baha'u'llah, he The station which he who hath truly recognized this revelation will attain is the same as the one ordained for such prophets of the house of Israel as are not regarded as manifestations endowed with constancy. Think of these knights of Baha'u'llah, think of these apostles of the Master, the disciples of the Master, the apostles of Baha'u'llah, who first promulgated this faith around the world, and what their station must be in the next world. Manifestation not regarded as endowed with constancy is referred to in various parts of the scriptures and in letters of the Guardian. It refers to those manifestations who depend, their revelation depends on a previous revelation. That is, they don't have an independent book, but they are acting under the aegis of one of the former manifestations. Manifestations endowed with constancy are manifestations endowed with the power of direct revelation of Scripture. In connection with the manifestations destined to follow the revelation of Baha'u'llah, Abdu'l-Baha makes this definite and weighty declaration. Concerning the manifestations that will come down in the future, in the shadow of the clouds, know verily that insofar as their relation to the source of their inspiration is concerned, they are under the shadow of the ancient beauty being a title of Baha'u'llah. In their relation, however, to the age in which they appear, and each and every one of them doeth whatsoever he willeth. So they will be able to produce their own revelation, and they will be able to alter the provisions and injunctions of the Kitab-i Aqdas itself. O my friend, he thus addresses in one of his tablets a man of recognized authority and standing. The undying fire which the Lord of the kingdom hath kindled in the midst of the holy tree is burning fiercely in the midmost heart of the world. The conflagration it will provoke will envelop the whole earth. Its blazing flames will illuminate its peoples and kindreds. All the signs have been revealed, every prophetic allusion hath been manifested. Whatever hath been enshrined in all the scriptures of the past hath been made evident. To doubt or hesitate is no more possible. Time is pressing. The divine charger is impatient and can tarry no longer. Ours is the duty to rush forward, and ere it is too late, win the victory. I think this is quite a resounding call which reverberates in our own lives and in our own duties in respect to the cause itself. And finally, in this most stirring passage, which he, in one of his moments of exaltation, was moved to address to one of his most trusted and eminent followers in the earliest days of his ministry. What more shall I say? What else can my pen recount? So loud is the call that reverberates from the Abha kingdom that mortal ears are well nigh deafened with its vibrations. The whole creation, methinks, is being disrupted and is bursting asunder through the shattering influence of the divine summons issued from the throne of glory. More than this, I cannot write. You will find all these passages in the dispensation of Baha'u'llah in the World Order letters. Reflect, friends, on the situation of humanity at the present moment, on the trials and difficulties that are afflicting the mass of people generally everywhere, to consider how the vibrations of the revelation are disrupting what people would like to think is the proper established situation of mankind. And I really like to look, if we look at it from the point of view of materialism and of the various doctrines of evolution, material evolution, uh, theories respected what the origin of man is, theories with respect to how the creation came into being. Uh, we think of what we're living as being fairly stable and organized. Now, we read earlier in the forward to God Passes By how so much disruption is taking place because of the vibrating influence of this revelation. It's shaking humanity to, it has to, by degrees, awaken people. And one of the mysteries of God is the true suffering that people seem to wake up to the reality of their own situations. Um, it takes some thought and sorting out, looking at these various passages, particularly these here of the Master that we read at the end, to meditate and consider what's the impact of the revelation at the present time. We know that, we're told that the revelation is like the dawning of the sun. Its rays are not their full strength when it first appears on the horizon of the world. Baha'u'llah has come, he's gone on his way, his influence continues. In fact, the Master talks about how great is the influence of Baha'u'llah in the world now. Shoghi Effendi in God Passes By also talks about how the manifestation freed from the limitations of his mortal being, how much greater is he able to shine on humanity with the influence of his divine spirit. Yes, he has to come here, he has to appear here, he has to establish himself here. But the rising of this sun until it reaches the zenith of its appearance in the course of the dispensation of Baha'u'llah, particularly, I think, in this first dispensation, which we don't know what the length of it will be. He said it will be no less than 1,000 years. But the masters referred in tablets to its length being 5,000 years, or possibly even 10,000 years. Uh, Shoghi Effendi has mentioned this dispensation, the first dispensation, the mother dispensation of the Baha'i cycle, as being the most important, the most holy, the most mighty of all the dispensations. It has included, of course, the appearance of the Bab, of Baha'u'llah, and then of the Master, and the administrative order, the guardian, and now the Universal House of Justice. But we're still at a very early stage, and those that hear about the truth of the cause may wonder, how does this match the reality of the things around us? And Shoghi Effendi warned of the deceptions of viewing the political situation of mankind as any kind of remedy for this. This is the breakdown. This is the dissolution of the old order. This is the rolling up of the old order, as Baha'u'llah says, and the spreading out of a new one. I don't think it's going to finish very soon. Shoghi Effendi talked about the suffering being prolonged. We can see that nothing quite gets better. It keeps getting worse. All of this gradually comes to a stage of climax where there's a cleansing. a purging of the state of our consciousness and beliefs, and bringing us into a, a period of great receptivity to the revelation itself. It was in the hands of God, the timing of all this, but the more we read the revelation, the more we're imbued with this vision, the greater we will perceive the signs of it around us and in the situation that prevails. Now we're going to come. Here we have a new section of the dispensation coming up. Shoghi Effendi goes on, when he's finished now having presented excerpts from the Bab, from Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha about the nature of the revelation, he goes on in his commentary, in his message. Again, he addresses, he says, "Dearly beloved friends, enough has been said in the quoted excerpts from the writings of the Bab, of Baha'u'llah, and of Abdul Baha are sufficiently numerous and varied to convince the conscientious reader of the sublimity of this unique cycle in the world's religious history." The sublimity of this unique cycle in the world's religious history. It would be utterly impossible to over-exaggerate its significance or to overrate the influence it has exerted and which it must increasingly exert as its great system unfolds itself amidst the welter of a collapsing civilization. The same image of what we've been talking about the power of the revelation and what it's instilled into the destinies of the human race, which will gradually make its appearance in human spirits. To whoever may read these pages, a word of warning seems, however, advisable. Before I proceed further with the development of my argument, a word of warning. What is Shoghi Effendi going to tell us now? Let no one meditating in the light of the aforementioned passages on the nature of the revelation of Baha'u'llah mistake its character or misconstrue the intent of its author. The divinity attributed to so great a being and the complete incarnation of the names and attributes of God in so exalted a person should under no circumstances be misconceived or misinterpreted. So we see he's affirming Baha'u'llah's divinity. He's affirming the greatness of his being. He's affirming the complete incarnation of the names and attributes of God. The complete in so exalted a person should under no circumstances be misconceived or misinterpreted. The human temple that has been made the vehicle of so overpowering a revelation must, if we be faithful to the tenets of our faith, ever remain entirely distinguished from that innermost spirit of spirits and eternal essence of essences, that invisible yet rational God who, however much we extol the divinity of his manifestations on earth, can in no wise incarnate his infinite, his unknowable, his incorruptible, and all-embracing reality in the concrete and limited frame of a mortal being. Indeed, the God who, could so incarnate his own reality, would, in the light of the teachings of Baha'u'llah, cease immediately to be God. I think just you walk out and look at the night sky of this endless, this endless universe, endless galaxies and solar systems and planets and messengers of God throughout the whole thing, according to the implications of what we read. The essence of essences, the supreme being, the nameless and placeless, as the writings tell us that reality is, is not the same as the reality of Baha'u'llah. The infallible reflection of that reality. And so we see in the writings, Abdu'l-Baha's reference, he says, for instance, explaining that in the tablets, the phrase Hovalao, he is God, at the top of the tablet refers, he says, to Baha'u'llah. And indeed, in many of the passages, the very word God goes back to Baha'u'llah. God is being a name. It doesn't get back to the supreme essence, the nameless one. And God has sent him, as established the coming of the manifestations, as created Baha'u'llah, and named him. Friends, you realize, I invoke thee by thy name to do such and such and such and such. And then in other prayers, we see the explanation where it's, but in Baha'u'llah's own words, translated in present meditation, says, I invoke thee by he who is thy name, by him who is thy name. It's very, in a sense, self-effacing, that he refers to himself as the name of God in these prayers and tablets that we're invoking. We're invoking his name. We're invoking his reality. We're invoking, our prayers go to Baha'u'llah and through Baha'u'llah. Shoghi Effendi says, yes, we can direct ourselves to God himself if we wish, but that he implies that how foolish that would be when we have the manifestation of God who has a direct, is an immediate link for us here at this time to see the light of God, who is the divine presence, who is the source of divine confirmation for all of the Baha'is everywhere in the world. And in those in the spiritual kingdom related to this, the peoples who've gone on from this planet. Very interesting to say. Then he talks about in the passage here, so crude and fantastic a theory of divine incarnation is as removed from and incompatible with the essentials of Baha'i belief as are the no less inadmissible pantheistic and anthropomorphic conceptions of God, both of which the utterances of Baha'u'llah completely repudiate and the fallacy of which they expose. No less inadmissible pantheistic conceptions of God. This is where the creation is the same as God, that we are created within his being, exist within his being, so to speak. And then the anthropomorphic, this is the form of man, conceptions of God in the form of man. In other words, that the person of any one of the manifestations of God could be conceived of as the supreme being himself. He is the appearance, the reflection, appropriately designed by God to channel the divine influence into the lives of his creatures. But he's not, beyond that, the source himself of the divinity, the utmost limits there. Now he's having stated this very clearly, he's going to elaborate his argument by quoting a number of passages. He who in unnumbered passages acclaimed his utterance to be the voice of divinity, the call of God himself, which would say, okay, if he's giving the call of God, and sometimes you hear the believers, friends say that he is God, where else is God? Thus solemnly affirms in the Kitab-i-Gan. To every discerning and illumined eye, it is evident that God, the unknowable essence, the divine being, is immeasurably exalted beyond every human attribute, such as corporeal existence, ascent, descent, egress, and regress. He doesn't go up and down or come in and out. He's sanctified from his creation entirely. He's not dependent on it in any way. He is and hath ever been veiled in the ancient eternity of his essence, and will remain in his reality everlastingly hidden from the sight of men. He standeth exalted beyond and above all separation and unity, all proximity and remoteness. God was alone, there was none else beside him, is a sure testimony of his truth. Friends, I think you'll find that this is a Quranic quotation. From time immemorial, Baha'u'llah, speaking of God, explains, he, the divine being, hath been veiled in the ineffable sanctity of his exalted self from time immemorial, and will everlastingly continue to be wrapped in the impenetrable mystery of his unknowable essence. None of us are going to go. Knowledge of God doesn't reach to knowledge of the essence of God. It reaches to the reflection of his being, the effulgence of the revelation as it appears in the manifestations of God. Now he continues this passage, it quotes, and this is quite startling, I think, to a lot of us. 10,000 prophets, each of Moses, are thunderstruck upon the Sinai of their search at God's forbidding voice, thou shalt never behold me. Whilst a myriad messengers, each as great as Jesus, stand dismayed upon their heavenly thrones by the divine essence thou shalt never apprehend. How bewildering to me, insignificant as I am, Baha'u'llah in his communion with God affirms, is the attempt to fathom the sacred depths of thy knowledge. How futile my efforts to visualize the magnitude of the power inherent in thine handiwork, the revelation of thy creative power. When I contemplate, O my God, the relationship that bindeth me to thee, he in yet another prayer, revealed in his own handwriting, testifies, I am moved to proclaim to all created things, verily, I am God. And when I consider my own self, lo, I find it coarser than clay. What's the way out of this? Nobody can see God. Nobody can get to him. Even the manifestations of God are blocked. As I understand it in reading these various things, the omniscience of the manifestation refers to everything from himself down. He understands his own nature, and then everything else below him, all created things, are dependent upon him. He's the source of the effulgent glory of God, of his bounty, of his creative power. The door of the knowledge of the Ancient of Days, in other words, of the divine essence, Baha'u'llah further states in the Kitab-i-Gan, Being thus closed in the face of all beings, he, the source of infinite grace, hath caused those luminous gems of holiness to appear out of the realm of the spirit in the noble form of the human temple, and be made manifest unto all men, that they may impart unto the world the mysteries of the unchangeable being, and tell of the subtleties of his imperishable essence, as they are understood within his own divine reality. All the prophets of God, his well-favored, his holy and chosen messengers, are without exception the bearers of his names and the embodiments of his attributes. These well-favored, holy, chosen messengers are all the supreme appearance of the names and the embodiments. They are the bearers of his names and the embodiments of his attributes. All these names and attributes that we read about come through him, so to speak. These tabernacles of holiness, these primal mirrors which reflect the light of unfading glory, are but expressions of him who is the invisible of the invisible. So they are not the same, but they are expressions of him through his divine favor in such mysterious ways, really. You realize that when we go to the next world and we attain to the knowledge of God, we attain to his divine presence in that world. Shoghi Effendi has clarified in a letter that it's to the presence of the manifestations of God we attain in the other world. The divine essence is still sanctified above all perception. The manifestations of God then will constitute the Sun of Truth, which provides the life of the spiritual realm as well as the life in this world. All right, friends, let's look a little bit at the chat. Hello back to all of you. Greetings to you. Some of them are saying good evening. Some are saying good morning. Some different countries, Arab Peninsula, Guatemala, goodness.
$11.34, David Nathan.
Dear friends, any question you might have on topics at hand, please post here. Quotations of the bar, part of the package of Thursday class materials. I'm trying to find where we are generally in that outline.
We got that answered.
You've been answered that, I think.
11:34.
Yeah.
The House recognized the next minute.
You see the references 23, 24, and 25, the materials we've looked at today. I'm having trouble scrolling down here. Let's see. Someone asked, so in other words, Baha'u'llah is God come in the flesh. No, I think that actually that would be the opposite of what's being said here. Is he's a manifestation of the names and qualities of God, but not of the essence of God. But he has been caused God appear in flesh so that we have some immediate relationship to them in this world. It's only in the name of Baha'u'llah that serves as a symbol of the essence of essence, or is his personage, including his physical principle on earth, physical face, etc., also part of the symbol. All part of the symbol, as I understand it, they're all part of the symbol. But Shoghi Effendi says we should address all our prayers to Baha'u'llah. But he said you can address them to Baha'u'llah, who is the incarnation of the names and attributes of God, all the things that you will need any access, we will need any access to. And sorry, I lost my trail of thought here. Is it only in the name of Baha'u'llah that serves as a symbol on our physical face, etc., also part of the symbol? There's a very interesting letter where Shoghi Effendi says that, and I think this is in relation to passages that the master has said that the people are worshiping gods of their own imaginations. They each of us conceives of God in our imagination and then proceeds to worship that imagination. Shoghi Effendi says we have to come away from the influence of that. And he said you can do that through the image of Baha'u'llah, but the image of Baha'u'llah is not available. So he says you can do it through the photos of the master. And eventually you'll see the photo of Baha'u'llah. And that will help you to center on the fact that this has been manifested as an outer appearance in this world. Then one can address their prayers to that or through that. And eventually he said it's, of course, not the person of the manifestation that's the ultimate goal, but the light of God that shines through him. And then that identity of that divine presence flowing out of his being is the closest we get to God, so to speak. The sessions are not combined. We're just going on until we come to the end of that study, and then we'll see what else we do. All right. Could you please speak about the covenant of a last? That would be interesting, but another subject altogether. Will the House of Justice recognize the mixed manifestation of God? Where is this confirmed? Well, I've heard various discussions while I was in the Holy Land about this. It seems that Shoghi Effendi has confirmed that both the House and the Guardian will recognize the next manifestation, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the people will follow them in that recognition. Someone raised hypothetically what the situation is if the manifestation of God appears and he removes the powers of the House of Justice. And then the House of Justice denies him, and you can imagine the chaos that will cause. But Baha'u'llah says that he doesn't worry for himself, but him who will come after him in the future. In one sense, that applies to Abdul Baha, but Shoghi Effendi in the dispensation, as we will see as we move forward here, has also applied to subsequent manifestations. It's a question of the infinite cause of infinite chain of causation and so on, that it's important. You have to think about that a lot. You can look in some answered questions for explanations about that and other supportive tablets. I think we're to the end of this question section here. And we've also come to the end of our time today. It's a pleasure to have been with you, friends. I hope that these themes will act on your inner being, on your very nature, and help you to conceive what Shoghi Effendi wants us to conceive with respect to the nature of Baha'u'llah's revelation as described by the central figures of our faith. Thank you. Wish you all a wonderful week. And we'll see you next time.